Your paycheck belongs to the family now, my father, Thomas, said, his eyes cold. He wanted me to fund my sister's life. I agreed quietly to protect my grandfather's health. But when my grandfather found out I was being blackmailed, he didn't just get angry, he rewrote their entire future. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The sterile, beige walls of the hospital waiting room seemed to be closing in on me. For 3 days, I had been living in a fog of antiseptic smells, hushed footsteps, and the agonizingly slow tick of the clock. My grandfather, Theodore, the patriarch of our family and the only real parent I had ever known, was in the cardiac care unit, recovering from a massive heart attack that had nearly taken him from us. I was exhausted, my mind a blur of medical jargon and fear. My phone, which I had set to silent, buzzed relentlessly on the vinyl seat beside me. I ignored it, focusing only on the doctor who was finally walking toward me. "He's stable, Fiona," Dr. Patel said, her voice kind but firm. "He's a strong man, but I cannot be clearer about this. He must avoid all serious stress. Any significant emotional shock or intense conflict, it could be catastrophic. His recovery depends on absolute peace." I nodded, my throat tight. "I understand. Whatever it takes, absolute peace." I made a silent vow right then, a promise to shield him from any and all family drama. I finally escaped the hospital at 8 p.m., desperate for a shower and a few hours of real sleep before I returned. The moment I walked into my apartment, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a family emergency, group text from my father, Thomas. "Be at my house in 30 minutes. No excuses." A cold dread washed over me, far colder than the January air outside. My father never called a family emergency unless he wanted something. I drove to his house, the one my grandfather had bought for him years ago, and walked into an ambush. My father, Thomas, sat at the head of the dining room table, his face set in a mask of self-importance. My younger sister, Sophia, was beside him, holding her newborn son and wearing an expression of practiced woe. "You're late," Thomas snapped, gesturing to the empty chair opposite them. "I was at the hospital," I said, my voice flat with exhaustion. "Grandfather is stable, but the doctor said—" "We all know how he is," Thomas cut me off, waving his hand dismissively. "That's actually why we're here. We have a new family situation, and it requires a new arrangement." I gripped the edge of the table. "What arrangement?" Thomas leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're 30 years old, Fiona. You make an obscene amount of money as a financial analyst. You're not special, you know. You just got lucky with numbers. Your sister, on the other hand, has a real responsibility. She has a child." Sophia began to sniffle on cue. "It's just so hard, Fiona. The diapers, the formula. The baby needs so much, and I can't do it alone." I stared at her, my mind flashing to the designer baby bag I'd seen in her hallway. "Sophia, I gave you money last week, and I set up a college fund." "That's not enough." Thomas slammed his hand on the table. "That's sporadic. We need consistency. From now on, your paycheck belongs to the family. You will transfer 70% of your salary to a new joint account I've opened. I will manage it and distribute the funds as needed." "As needed?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You mean for Sophia?" "And for me," Thomas said, his voice rising. "This family needs to stick together. Your sister needs help raising her baby. You don't have a husband or kids, so it's your duty to provide." The audacity of it was suffocating. He wanted to seize my income. He wanted to punish me for my success and reward Sophia for her irresponsibility. The old Fiona, the one from before the hospital, would have unleashed a fury of spreadsheets and legal threats. I would have laughed in his face. But as I opened my mouth to fight, the image of my grandfather in that hospital bed, pale and tethered to a dozen machines, flashed in my mind. Absolute peace. My father saw the fight drain out of me. He mistook my silence for weakness, for submission. He smirked, leaning back in his chair. So, we are in agreement. I looked at his smug face and my sister's greedy, expectant gaze. They were vultures, picking at a family crisis. My promise to my grandfather was a shield for him, but for me, it was a cage. I took a slow, deep breath and nodded, my voice hollow. I agree. My father smiled, a triumphant, cruel expression. Good, I knew you'd see reason. I walked out of that house and sat in my car, the steering wheel cold beneath my hands. The silence was deafening. I hadn't just been B-bed, I had been blackmailed using the life of the man I loved most. The betrayal was worse than any financial demand. The first transfer was the following Friday. My hands trembled as I logged into my bank account and set up the recurring payment. Seeing that four-figure sum, money I had earned through 60-hour work weeks and sacrificing my own social life, vanish into an account controlled by my father felt like a physical violation. My apartment, usually my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a temporary holding cell. All my work, all my effort, was being siphoned away to fund Sophia's online shopping sprees and my father's failing, consulting, business. I tried to lose myself in my work, but the stress began to eat at me. I stopped sleeping properly. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., my heart pounding, my mind racing over balance sheets and the sickening realization of my own entrapment. I started skipping meals. Within 2 weeks, I had lost 10 pounds, and dark circles were permanent fixtures under my eyes. I maintained my daily visits to the hospital, plastering a bright, calm smile on my face the moment I stepped into Theodore's room. "You look thin, Fiona," he murmured one afternoon, his voice still reedy but his eyes as sharp as ever. "Just busy at work, Grandpa," I lied, fluffing his pillow. "You know how year-end reports are. Just focus on getting stronger." "You're a good girl," he said, patting my hand. His skin felt like paper. "You always hold this family together." A wave of guilt and shame washed over me. I wasn't holding it together, I was paying its ransom. The first sign of their escalating greed came exactly 1 week later. I was at my desk, trying to untangle a complex international portfolio, when my phone rang. It was Sophia. "Fiona," she said, her voice a high-pitched whine. "My car it just stopped working, right in the middle of the road. It was so scary. The baby could have been hurt." "What's wrong with it?" I asked, pinching the bridge of my nose. I had helped her buy that car less than 2 years ago. "I don't know, the engine or something. The mechanic said it's like thousands of dollars to fix. I don't have that. You need to send it to me." "Sophia, I just sent Dad the transfer. He's supposed to be managing the money for your needs. A car is a need, isn't it?" There was a pause, and I heard my father's muffled voice in the background. Sophia came back on, her tones suddenly petulant. "Dad said that money is for living, you know, for the house and the baby's future. This is an emergency. He said you should have your own emergency fund for things like this. It's your responsibility as an aunt." "My responsibility," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "Yes, if you don't send it, how will I get to my appointments? How will I get groceries?" "Take a taxi, Sophia. Use a delivery service. I'm busy." I hung up before she could reply. My hands were shaking. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the principle. They weren't just taking from me, they were demanding more, inventing new emergencies because they knew I was trapped. That evening, my father called me. I let it go to voicemail. His message was chilling. "Fiona, I am deeply disappointed in your attitude. Your sister is stranded and you refuse to help. This kind of selfishness, this stress, it's exactly the sort of thing that's bad for your grandfather's recovery. It would be a terrible shame if he heard about how his family is fighting, wouldn't it? He might have a setback. Send Sophia the money for the car. Do not make me ask again." It was no longer a veiled threat. It was open blackmail. He was explicitly weaponizing my grandfather's health against me. I sat on my sofa, the dark apartment silent around me, and a cold, hard anger began to burn through the exhaustion. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to have, a righteous fury that finally eclipsed my fear. I transferred Sophia the money for the car, but as I clicked, confirm, I felt a shift inside me. I was no longer just a victim. They thought I was just a quiet, obedient number cruncher. They thought I was weak. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who my mentor was. They had forgotten what I did for a living. I wasn't just a financial analyst. I was a forensic financial analyst. And my father had just made the fatal mistake of threatening the wrong person. He thought he was in control, but he had no idea what I was capable of. My father, Thomas, had always been a man defined by his disappointments. He was the only son of Theodore, a self-made man who had built a real estate empire from nothing. Theodore was brilliant, pragmatic, and tough. Thomas was none of those things. He coasted on the family name, dreaming of big, flashy ventures, while showing utter disdain for the day-to-day work that built the wealth he enjoyed. He'd started a consulting firm that, as far as I could tell, consulted no one and billed even less. He was a man drowning in his own mediocrity, and he was bitterly jealous of two people. His father, for having the success he'd never earned, and me, for showing the very aptitude he lacked. My devotion to my grandfather was absolute. When I was a child and my own mother had left, Thomas had been a cold and distant father. It was Theodore who stepped in. He'd see me struggling with my math homework and sit down with me. "It's not just numbers, Fiona," he'd say, his eyes twinkling. "It's a story. Every number tells a story. You just have to learn how to read it." He taught me how to read a balance sheet before I could drive. He paid for my entire education, celebrating my first-class honors in finance as if it were his own. He was the one who encouraged me to specialize in forensic analysis. "You have a gift for finding the truth in the mess, Fiona," he'd said. "It's a rare skill." My loyalty to him was boundless, and my father knew it. He was exploiting the purest love I had in my life for his own greedy ends. My sister, Sophia, was his perfect accomplice. She had been spoiled from birth, first by our father, who saw her as a doll he could parade around, and later by a string of boyfriends who were captivated by her looks and her feigned helplessness. She had learned early that pouting and crying got her whatever she wanted. The baby was just the newest, most effective tool in her arsenal. She didn't want to be a mother. She wanted the lifestyle of being a mother, all funded by someone else. The day after the car incident, I went to visit my grandfather. He was sitting up in his chair, looking stronger. He was reading the Wall Street Journal, a very good sign. "How's work, Fiona?" he asked, folding the paper. "It's fine, Grandpa," I said, trying to keep my voice light. He stared at me, his gaze penetrating. "You're lying. You've lost weight, and you look like you haven't slept in a month. What is your father doing?" The question was so direct, it nearly knocked the wind out of me. "What? Nothing. I'm just worried about you." "Don't," he said, his voice firm. "Don't protect him. I'm not made of glass. I know my own son. He's a leech, and he always has been. Now he sees me as weak, and he sees you as isolated. What is he doing?" I hesitated, the doctor's warning ringing in my ears. "No stress." "Grandpa, please, I don't want to upset you." "What will upset me?" he said, leaning forward. "Is my son running roughshod over my granddaughter while I sit here helpless? He's taking money from you, isn't he? To pay for Sophia's bratty lifestyle." I couldn't speak, but my silence was an answer. "How much?" he demanded. I looked down at my hands. 70% of my salary. Theodore closed his eyes. He didn't yell. He didn't gasp. He just sat there, breathing slowly. When he opened his eyes, the frail patient was gone, and the founder of a real estate empire was looking back at me. There was ice in his eyes. "And you let him," he said. "It wasn't a question." He said it was for the best, to keep the peace. "For you," I whispered, shame washing over me. "He threatened to come here and make a scene to tell you we were fighting over money," he said, the stress. "It could, you know." "He's blackmailing you," Theodore stated, his voice flat and cold. "He is using my heart attack to extort my granddaughter." "I promised the doctor," I said, my voice cracking. "Absolute peace, I promised you." "That promise," he said, pointing a finger at me, "was about protecting me, not enabling him. You did the right thing by honoring it, but now the rules have changed. He pressed the call button for the nurse. Grandpa, what are you doing? I need my phone, he said, and I need you to call my lawyer, David Epstein. Tell him to meet us at my house, tomorrow at 10. Meet us, you're not supposed to leave. The doctor said I need a stress-free environment. And I can assure you, Fiona, there is nothing more stressful for me than knowing a parasite is bleeding my family dry. I'm discharging myself, against medical advice, if necessary. A nurse bustled in. Mr. Theodore, is everything all right? Everything is perfect, dear, he said, giving her a charming smile. I'm feeling much stronger. In fact, I think I'm ready to go home. Now be a dear and get me my discharge papers and my phone, please. As the nurse hurried off, he looked at me, the steel back in his spine. They've forgotten one crucial thing, Fiona. They've forgotten who controls the money. Not just your paycheck, child, all of it. The moment I agreed to help my grandfather, the suffocating weight of victimhood lifted, replaced by the cold, familiar hum of professional focus. I was no longer a daughter being bullied. I was a forensic analyst on a case. And the target was my own father. Theodore was discharged the next morning, his doctors furious and his lawyer, David Epstein, waiting with a town car. We drove to my grandfather's house, a large, stately home that was a testament to his life's work. It was also, I knew, the headquarters from which we would launch our counteroffensive. We settled my grandfather in his study, a warm, wood-paneled room lined with books. David, a sharp man in his 60s who had been by my grandfather's side for 40 years, opened his briefcase. Okay, Theodore, David said, you're risking your health by being here. This had better be good. It's good, my grandfather grunted. He looked at me. Fiona, tell him everything. The meeting, the 70%, the threats. I laid it all out, my voice clear and detached, just as I would for a client. I detailed the bank account Thomas had forced me to pay into, the exact amount of the 2 transfers I had already made, the emergency request for the car, and the explicit voicemail where Thomas had used my grandfather's health as leverage. David Epstein listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with every word. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. This is not just family unpleasantness, Theodore, David finally said, his voice grim. This is extortion. It's elder person-atrisk abuse, using you as the atrisk person. It's coercion. He's crossed several legal lines. I know, my grandfather said, and he's about to find out how many. He turned to me. Fiona, your father thinks you're just a number cruncher. He's forgotten that I've been teaching you the business since you were 16. He thinks the family assets are just some abstract pile of money he'll inherit when I'm gone. He has no idea about the trust. This was the clever trap I had been counting on. My father believed the family wealth was a simple inheritance. He was wrong. Decades ago, my grandfather, already wary of Thomas's recklessness, had placed his entire real estate empire into a complex, irrevocable dynastic trust. He had made himself the sole trustee. The trust's bylaws were explicit. It was designed to preserve the family's assets for generations, and the trustee had absolute discretion over all distributions. Thomas was a beneficiary, but he had no control. Your father, my grandfather continued, has been receiving a generous monthly stipend from the trust. He thinks of it as an allowance. He has no idea that his own struggling, consulting firm has been secretly bailout out by me, through the trust, 3 times in the last 5 years. He thinks he's a businessman. He's a charity case. So what's the plan? I asked, my analyst's brain kicking in. We cut him off. Not yet, my grandfather said, a cunning look in his eye. A cornered rat just gets vicious. We need to let him walk right into the trap. David, I want you to draw up a new document, an amendment to my will and the trust. An amendment? David asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, one that names Fiona as my co-trustee, effective immediately, and my sole successor as trustee upon my passing. I also want you to draft a full revocation of all of Thomas's beneficiary rights to be held in escrow, and one more for Sophia. David almost smiled. That's aggressive, Theodore. He blackmailed my granddaughter, David. Aggressive is just the starting point. He turned back to me. Now, Fiona, your turn. I want you to use your skills. I want to know where every penny of the money you gave him went. And I want to know the real state of his business. I want a full forensic workup. Can you do that? I can, I said, a grim sense of purpose settling over me. Good, and one more thing. You are to continue paying him. I recoiled. What, Grandpa, no? Yes, he insisted. You will make the next transfer. You will even send him a polite email confirming it. You will document everything. Every call, every text, every demand. We are not just going to tell him he's wrong. We are going to prove it in a way he can never, ever deny. We are building a case, and when we're done, he will have nothing left to stand on. For the next week, I worked like a woman possessed. By day, I was at my real job. By night, I was in my grandfather's study, digging into my father's life. It was disgustingly easy. He was sloppy. The joint account he'd had me pay into, he'd immediately transferred my first payment to a personal credit card. The charges on it were not for Sophia's baby. They were for high-end restaurants, a new set of golf clubs, and 2 payments to a gentleman's club downtown. My second payment, the one for Sophia's car trouble, it had been split. Half went to Sophia, who immediately spent it on a designer handbag I saw on her Instagram. The other half went directly to a business account for Thomas's consulting firm. Then I dug into the firm itself. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just failing, it was a shell. He was deeply in debt, not just to the trust, but to outside creditors. He was being threatened with legal action for non-payment. By his office landlord, he wasn't just trying to fund Sophia's life, he was trying to save himself from bankruptcy. My paycheck was his lifeline. I compiled everything into a clean, indisputable report, complete with bank statements, credit card receipts, and screenshots. I presented it to my grandfather and David. He's not just greedy, I said, my voice hollow. He's desperate. Desperate men are sloppy, my grandfather said, his eyes scanning the report. He's given us all the ammunition we need. Now, it's time to set the final meeting. David, I want you to call Thomas. Tell him I'm recovering and I need to have a family meeting to restructure some things for my health. Tell him to bring Sophia. He'll think it's his final victory. He'll think I'm going to finally give him control. And when is this meeting? David asked. Tomorrow, Theodore said, closing the report. I'm tired of this. Let's finish it. The air in my grandfather's study was thick with tension. It was exactly 10 a.m., the time David had set for the meeting. My grandfather sat behind his massive oak desk, looking every bit the patriarch. I sat to his right, a black binder in my lap. David Epstein sat to his left, a stack of legal documents in front of him. The study door opened, and my father and Sophia walked in. Thomas was wearing his best suit, a smug, predatory smile on his face. He clearly believed this was his coronation, the moment the old man finally ceded power. Sophia, holding her baby, looked bored and impatient, as if this were a formality before her next shopping trip. Father, Thomas said, his voice oozing false concern, you should be in bed, but I'm glad you called this meeting. It's time we got the family's affairs in order. Yes, it is, Theodore said, his voice like gravel. Sit down, both of you. They took the seats opposite the desk. Thomas leaned forward, placing his hands on the desk as if he already owned it. Now, I'm sure Fiona has told you about our new arrangement. It's for the best. With your health, you shouldn't be worried about these things. I'm prepared to take over management of the family finances. Sophia and the baby are the priority now, after all. Sophia chimed in. Yes, Grandpa, it's been so hard. We really need more support. My grandfather stared at them. He let the silence stretch, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Thomas's smile began to falter. Is that so, Thomas? My grandfather finally said, You're prepared to take over. Of course, Thomas said, puffing out his chest. I'm your son, it's my birthright. Birthright? Theodore repeated, his voice dangerously soft. That's an interesting word. Before we discuss your birthright, let's review your management skills. He nodded to me. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. This was my turf. I opened the binder. On Friday, 2 weeks ago, I began, my voice clear and cold, I transferred $4,200 into the account you specified, Thomas. You claimed this was for family needs and Sophia's baby. Is that correct? Thomas's eyes flickered to me, surprised by my tone. Yes, that's right, for diapers, formula, the essentials. That's a lie, I said flatly. At 2:15 p.m. that same day, you transferred $4,000 of that money to your personal Visa card. Would you like me to read the charges? Because I have them. $850 at the Oak Room Steakhouse, $1,200 at the Pine Valley Golf Pro Shop, and 2 separate charges of $500 each at the Starlight Lounge, which I believe is a gentleman's club. Sophia's head snapped toward her father, her eyes wide. You spent it. You said it was all for me. Thomas's face went from smug to pale to a mottled, furious red. How dare you? You are spying on me. That is private. It became my business, I shot back, when it was my money. Money you blackmailed me for. Blackmailed? Thomas sputtered, standing up. I did no such thing. I am protecting this family. Sit down, my grandfather commanded. Thomas, out of sheer reflex, dropped back into his chair. I continued, turning to the next page. Then there was the car emergency for Sophia. You demanded I pay $3,000, which I did. You told her it was my duty. But the mechanic's bill was only $1,500. Sophia, you spent the other $1,500 on a new handbag, which you posted on Instagram 3 hours later. The other half of my money, Thomas, went into your consulting firm's account. I slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was an eviction notice. Your firm is 3 months behind on rent. It's a shell and it's bankrupt. You're being sued by 2 different creditors. You haven't had a real client in 9 months. You weren't supporting the family, Thomas. You were trying to use my paycheck to stop your own financial ruin. Sophia was openly crying now, but not from sadness. You lied to me. You used my baby. Quiet, Sophia, Thomas roared. He turned to my grandfather, his face a mask of despair. Ration? Father, she's twisting things. She's always been jealous of Sophia. This is just numbers, it's not the truth. Thomas, my grandfather said, his voice low and filled with a chilling finality. The numbers are the truth. The numbers don't lie, but you do. Thomas looked from me to my grandfather, seeing his inheritance, his lifeline, vanish. His bluster evaporated, replaced by a desperate, pathetic panic. You can't do this, he shrieked. I'm your son, you're an old man, you don't know what you're doing. She's poisoned you against me. She didn't have to, Theodore said, his voice rising for the first time. You did that all by yourself. You used my heart attack, the very thing that could have killed me, as a weapon to steal from your own daughter. You are not just a disappointment, Thomas. You are a disgrace. My father's threats were gone. His lies were exposed. He was just a small, desperate man in an expensive suit, and he had been checkmated by a spreadsheet. He just sat there, opening and closing his mouth, but no sounds came out. The confrontation was over. The trap had snapped shut. The silence in the study was absolute. Thomas was pale, his hands gripping the arms of the chair so tightly his knuckles were white. He was trapped, but his mind was clearly racing, searching for an escape route. Sophia, on the other hand, had dissolved into a fit of hysterical, wailing sobs. My baby, she cried, clutching the infant to her chest. What's going to happen to my baby? You can't just cut us off. He's your great-grandson. This was her last card, the one she always played. Thomas saw his opening. He lunged for it. She's right, father, he said, his voice regaining a slippery, desperate edge. You can't punish an innocent child. Sophia is young, she made a mistake. She was manipulated by me, you see, I was desperate. The business, the stress, I wasn't thinking clearly. But she needs that money. The baby needs it. I watched him, disgusted, as he calmly threw his own daughter under the bus to save himself. He was trying to pivot, to reposition himself as a flawed man who had made a mistake, while painting Sophia as the real victim in need. "It's true, Grandpa," Sophia quickly agreed, wiping her fake tears. "I didn't know about his debts. I just know I can't afford to raise my son. Fiona has to help me. It's her duty." My grandfather looked at them, his expression unreadable. He had seen this all before. "So, Fiona is still the solution to your problems," he stated. "Yes," Thomas said, nodding eagerly. "She's a financial analyst. She can help me restructure my business. She can set up a budget for Sophia. We can fix this, as a family." The audacity of it, to ask me to fix the very mess he had created by stealing from me, was breathtaking. "No," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "What?" Thomas snapped. "No, I will not fix your business. I will not set up a budget for Sophia. I am done. The bank of Fiona is closed." "You selfish," Thomas began, lurching forward. "Enough," Theodore roared, slamming his hand on the desk. The sound echoed in the room like a gunshot. "Both of you are still talking about Fiona's money. You seem to be under the impression that any of this is yours for the taking." He turned to David Epstein. "David, do you have the report from Mr. Harrison?" David nodded, pulling another file from his briefcase. "I do." "Who," Thomas asked, "is Mr. Harrison?" "Mr. Harrison," David replied coolly, "is a private investigator I retained last week at Theodore's request. After Fiona uncovered your financial state, Theodore was concerned. He wondered why a man with your monthly trust stipend would be in such dire straits. He thought perhaps you had a gambling problem." Thomas's face went ashen. "You don't, as it turns out," David continued, opening the file. "Your problem is far more expensive. Her name is Isabel, and she's a 28-year-old artist living in a luxury condo downtown. A condo, it seems, that you paid the security deposit and first 3 months' rent for, right after your father's heart attack. It seems you weren't just blackmailing Fiona to save your business. You were blackmailing her to fund your affair." This time, the silence was different. It was the sound of total annihilation. Sophia's wail was no longer fake. It was a shriek of genuine, absolute betrayal. She stood up, her face contorted in a rage I had never seen. "An affair," she screamed at Thomas. "You spent my baby's money on another woman. You told me you were broke. You told me Fiona was the only way." "Now, Sophia, calm down. It's not what it looks like," Thomas stammered, backing away. "This," my grandfather said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "is the truth you were talking about, Thomas. This is the family you've been protecting." He looked at me, and I saw a deep, profound sadness in his eyes, the look of a man who is about to perform a painful but necessary surgery. "David," he said, his voice firm again, "the documents, please." David Epstein picked up the stack of papers in front of him. "Thomas, Sophia, your behavior has triggered several key clauses in the Theodore Grayson Family Trust. Clauses related to conduct injurious to the family and financial malfeasance. Your father, as sole trustee, has asked me to prepare these. First, a formal injunction barring you from contacting Fiona in any way. Second, a revocation of your beneficiary status." Thomas's spell was broken. The last thread of his desperate hope snapped. He wasn't just losing my paycheck, he was losing everything. "No," he whispered, staring at the papers. "Father, you can't. I'm your son. I'm your son." "You stopped being my son," Theodore said, his voice raw with a pain I hadn't heard before, "when you decided to use my life as a bargaining chip to bankrupt your daughter. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." My grandfather pushed himself up from his desk. He was no longer a frail patient. He was a giant. The authority in that room was entirely his. "David," Theodore said, "please give them the papers." David Epstein stood and walked around the desk. He held out 2 thick, bound documents. "This one, Thomas, is for you. It is a full and immediate revocation of all your rights and access as a beneficiary of the trust. Your monthly stipend is terminated. The trust will no longer service the debts of your consulting firm. We will, in fact, be cooperating with your creditors. The home you live in is a trust asset, and you will have 30 days to vacate it. Thomas stared at the document as if it were a snake. He didn't take it. David placed it on the desk in front of his empty chair. He then turned to Sophia, who was standing frozen, her baby blessedly quiet in her arms. "Sophia," David said, his voice slightly softer, "yours is different. Your access to trust funds is also terminated. However, your father," he nodded at Theodore, "is not a monster. He has instructed me to create a new, separate, and heavily restricted trust. It is for the sole benefit of your son, for his health, education, and welfare. The trustee of this new account will be Fiona." Sophia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief and fury. "Fiona, you're giving her control of my money." "It is not your money," my grandfather said, walking toward her. "It is your son's, and Fiona is the only person in this family, besides me, who has proven she can be trusted with it. She will approve payments for diapers, for formula, for doctor's visits, and for his education. She will not approve payments for handbags, car repairs you lied about, or your salon appointments. You will submit receipts for everything." This, for Sophia, was the ultimate humiliation. Not just losing the money, but being forced to beg for it, to justify her existence, to the very sister she had tried to defraud. "No," she shrieked. I won't be bossed around by her. I'd rather have nothing." "That," my grandfather said, "is precisely your choice. You can accept these terms, and your son will be provided for, or you can refuse, and you will both walk out of here with nothing. The choice is yours, but the days of Fiona funding your irresponsibility are over." This was the moment. Sophia looked at my grandfather's implacable face. She looked at me, no longer her victim but her gatekeeper. And she looked at her father, a broken, useless man who had nothing left to offer her. Her entire world, built on lies and manipulation, had crumbled in the span of 10 minutes. The realization hit her. The fight drained away, replaced by a cold, sullen acceptance. She snatched the papers from David's hand. "Fine," she spat, "but I'm not thanking her." "No one expected you to," I said quietly. All eyes turned to Thomas. He was a cornered animal. He had lost his daughter, his father, his inheritance, his home, and his mistress. He had nothing left to lose. "You," he snarled, his eyes locking on me. "This is all your fault. You and your spreadsheets. You've always been a cold, calculating snake. You turned him against me." He lunged, not at my grandfather, but at me. He swept his arm across the desk, sending my laptop, my binder, and a priceless lamp crashing to the floor. "You ruined me," he screamed, his face purple with rage. I didn't even flinch. Before he could take a second step, my grandfather, with a speed that belied his age and condition, grabbed the heavy, old-fashioned telephone from his desk and held it up like a weapon. "Get out of my house," Theodore commanded, his voice shaking with a righteous fury. Thomas froze. He looked at the phone, at his father's face, and he finally understood that it was over. The power was gone. Defeated, he turned. He didn't look at his daughter. He didn't look at his father. He just grabbed H's eviction notice from the desk and, with his shoulders slumped, walked out of the study. He closed the door behind him with a soft, final click. The reign of Thomas Grayson was over. The silence that followed my father's exit was heavy, broken only by Sophia's quiet, resentful sobs. She wouldn't look at me. She wouldn't look at my grandfather. She just clutched her baby, signed the trust acceptance forms David handed her, and left. The heavy front door of the house closed, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt a sense of quiet. The storm had passed. I sank into one of the chairs, my adrenaline-fueled strength vanishing, leaving me exhausted. My grandfather slowly put the phone back on its cradle and sat down heavily behind his desk. He looked at me, his eyes full of a love and pride that warmed me to my core. "Well," he said, his voice rough. "That was eventful, more stress than the doctor would like, I imagine." I laughed, a shaky, relieved sound. I think you handled it, Grandpa. We handled it, he corrected, reaching across the desk to put his hand over mine. You were brilliant, Fiona. You were strong. You were everything I raised you to be. Tears welled in my eyes, but for the first time, they weren't from stress or sadness. They were from relief. He's really gone. He is, David Epstein said, already packing his briefcase. The legalities are ironclad, Fiona. He has no claim. The house will be sold. His debts are his own. He is, for all legal intents and purposes, no longer a part of this family's financial structure. In the weeks that followed, the new reality set in. My father, true to form, tried to fight it. He hired a lawyer who sent a blustering, threatening letter. David Epstein responded with a single package: the complete forensic report on his finances, the private investigator's file on his affair, and a signed affidavit from me detailing the extortion. My father's lawyer quit the case the next day. Thomas was forced to declare bankruptcy. He lost the house. The last I heard, he had moved into a small, rented apartment, finally forced to live within the means of a man with no one to support him but himself. Sophia, on the other hand, adapted with surprising speed. The first week, she sent me a list of demands that included organic groceries, a new stroller, and a nanny. I sent her a polite email back with a link to the trust's bylaws and a prepaid debit card with a strict budget for formula and diapers. She called me, screaming, but when the card was her only source of funds, she quickly learned how to submit a receipt. It was a harsh lesson in reality, but one that was long overdue. For the first time, she was being forced to be a parent, and her son was finally getting the care he deserved. As for me, my life began to return. The dark circles under my eyes faded. I started sleeping through the night. My grandfather, now fully recovered, formally made me co-trustee of the estate. We worked together, side by side in his study, not as a frail old man and his caretaker, but as partners. He was teaching me the last of his secrets, the intricacies of the empire he had built, preparing me for the day it would be mine to lead. One evening, we were finishing our work when he looked up at me. "You know," he said, "your father was wrong about one thing." "Only one?" I asked, smiling. "He said you weren't special. He was a fool. You're the only special thing that ever came from him. You are the legacy, Fiona. Not the buildings, not the money, you." I closed my laptop and walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights. I had been blackmailed, betrayed, and pushed to my breaking point, but I had held on. I had protected the man I loved, and in doing so, I had found my own strength. The peace was no longer a cage, it was real, and it was mine.